This video is about making this pair of what I call variable tornado bowl. Unlike a regular tornado bowl, which stays fairly constant all the way, this one varies, where in this case the maple is all maple at the top. The wenge segments vary by getting bigger, and the maple varies by getting smaller all the way down. You get a pair of these because you make it out of 3/4 inch wood and then split it, which I'll show, split the rings, which I'll show on the video. What is different about this than a regular tornado bowl lies in the design. So I'll spend a little more time on the design in this video than I normally would, and a little less time on the making process. That's what this video is about. Hope you enjoy it. So to make a variable tornado bowl, I started with the design for a regular tornado bowl. I'm using Segment Pro, and once I was happy with the design, I went to the summary and exported it to a spreadsheet. So I then pulled in the spreadsheet into OpenOffice. I then highlighted by thickness, which will help me later when I do my wood takeoff. So the ones that are not highlighted are under 3/4 width. Then these are between 0.75 and 1 inch, and then the yellow is above 1 inch, up to 1.25 inches. So once I did that, I added in some additional columns. So I'm calling it adjusted segment length for mixed rings, and then adjusted board length to help me with my wood takeoff. This is the same as the segment length was over there, just to help me with the calcs. So I'm starting off with all wenge at the bottom for the first 4 rows and doing it as 24 segment. Then I'm going to go with a slice of maple that's a 1/16 of an inch thick. And so the calculation for the wenge, you can see, is the original segment length times 2 minus the 1/16 of an inch. So the total of these two columns needs to equal 2 times the segment length. So as long as that's true, you'll get the same diameters out of every ring. So when I plugged in the 1/16 of an inch, I figured out that if I added a 1/16 of an inch to every one of these, I'd be a fairly smooth transition to all maple. At this point, I switched to plugging in the number for the wenge and switch the equation to be the same thing to calculate the segment length for the maple. So with that, these are my adjusted segment lengths. Rings up to 5/16, I am going to cut a straight slice. In other words, a 90-degree 1/16 of an inch slice. And because of that, those rings need to be 12 segment. And then the same thing down here, so starting at this one, row 30, it needs to be 12 segments. Okay, so that basically is the design process. I will then use this sheet to do all my cutting, and I will highlight by circling the 12s so that I know that I'm doing 12 segments on those rings. That'll help me during my cutting process. So hopefully that design is clear. Yesterday I ripped all the lumber down to the required dimensions, and I'm starting by making this variable tornado bowl by cutting the slices. As I mentioned in the design, obviously you can't make a segment a 1/16 of an inch thick, it goes to nothing. So up to 1/4 of an inch I'm doing slices, and I'm going to do all the slices. I'm going to start with the 1/16 and work my way up. I'll show a few cuts and then I'll show the setup to move to the next thickness. So I cut 15 segments or slices of the maple. That gives me a few extra. I needed 12. Since it's so small and I don't want to return to this setup, I'm doing that. So I'll show the setup. I'm going to cut the wenge, but then I'll show the setup going to 1/8 inch. Okay, so the only change on the setup, and the reason I'm doing all the slices is this way I don't have to return to this 90-degree configuration on the sled, is I bumped the last piece I cut up against the stop block. And since I'm only going from a 1/16 to an 1/8, I'm just eyeballing. And again, these slices only have to be close, but I do want to be close. And then I use a piece of scrap wood to test the thickness. I'll show a cut. Oh, that is exactly 1/8 of an inch. That's sheer luck, not skill. So I have all the slices cut. I went up to 5/16 because it still didn't look all that thick to me. At 3/8 I'll cut segments. All these are ready. I'm going to put them aside until I need to make those rings. So I have cut the first 4 rings, which are solid wenge, and checked them off on my sheet. And the next ring is one that's mixed. It's the first one that's getting maple. So in order to make these segments fit, because I'm doing slices, I have to go to a 12 segment cut. So I've got 12 segments sitting there. This is the container I put the 1/16 inch slices in. I can dump that out, and one goes between each of these. The wenge is a little thicker than it needs to be. Okay, so the fit is good. And the diameter is supposed to be 3.8 inches. And it's 3 3/4. So that's pretty close. Okay, so that's the way you do those with the slices. I will come back and show when I do one with regular segments. So I have the bowl bottoms ready to make a floating bottom out of it. I have turned it and made it round, and then turned it to basically route in a groove for the disc to go in like that and be the bottom. So it's already laser engraved, and when I'm done I'll cut it off and basically it'll be pretty well done. I did put some finish on these, probably put a little more on when I'm done, but I sanded off the 2 corners where I'm going to glue it into the bottom. So that's what I'm going to do next. Oh, I forgot to explain, I did laminate some maple veneer to a piece of wenge so that I could laser engrave and have it be visible and yet still look like wenge on the inside. Okay, all it gets is 2 spots. So I've got 5 rings that I've made up. I've flattened them on the drum sander, and now I'm going to split them using this ring splitter on my table saw. It takes 2 or 3 passes generally. Now that I have all the rings split, I will flatten the other side, the side where the saw blade was, and get them down to the desired thickness. So in the design phase, I talked about using slices rather than segments on the 1/16 through 5/16 rings. These rings are all ready to glue on to the second vase. This one is the first one where it's segments. So I just wanted to show you. You can see how it's tapering down. And in order to have the inside and the outside look pretty much the same, at least close to the ends, it's important to do the slices, which means you have to have a 12 segment ring versus a 24 segment ring. So I just wanted to show that. So I'm starting to put the fade to black bowl together, at least the first one. And because my cold jaws are so large, I switched over to the smallest set of jaws I had, and I'm going on the inside because this ring is smaller than that ring, and that way I can sandwich them up. But I'm gluing it up. I'll show that real quick. Rings with the slices in it, the maple slices. And now I need to worry about orientation. So I am going to make these 2 vases be mirror twins. In other words, one's going to twist to the right, one's going to twist to the left. These first couple of rings, since the slices are so small, I can't just go for an overlap on the slice. I'm going to give it about 1/8 of an inch extra twist. Otherwise, it's not going to look like it's twisting at all. I'm doing the finish turning and the sanding on the inside as I go, because later I may not be able to reach down there and the tools may not be able to go down there. Typically I add, it depends on how wide the diameter is, but 3 to 6 of these rings before turning to minimize the reach of the tool. So starting out, I had not only no overlap, I actually staggered the rings to give it a little bit more twist, and I have gradually reduced that down to the point now where I am overlapping. So from this point on, I will go for an overlap of the maple, at least until I get to the top, and then I'll do the same thing with the wingate. Okay, I've got 6 rings left to add on, so I'm closing in. I want to just point out again, I have done, my hand barely fits in the hole now, so I have done all the finish turning and sanding on the inside because my fingers will never go that far again. This ring is smaller than that one, and the next one's even smaller. So I'm just going to be adding 3 rings on and doing turning and then sanding. So I'm going to complete the turning on the outside, or at least start the turning on the outside to make it round, finish the inside, then I'll come back and do the finish turning on the whole outside. Well, I was getting a little bit of vibration when I was turning this outside, so I put on my one-way steady rest, which took that away. So I'm going to start turning on the inside. I'm going in with a round carbide. I'll show a little bit of the inside turning. At this point, the inside is turned and sanded and ready for finish. The outside I'm going to turn and then sand, and then I'll be ready to put on finish on inside and out. So I'm going to turn using a 1-inch round nose scraper, freshly sharpened, and then run a negative rake scraper over it to get it ready for sanding. So the bowl is turned and sanded, and I'm ready to put on finish. And since my fingers only reach to about there, I'm using this to get to the bottom. I'm going to put on 2 coats of friction polish, starting on the inside, and I'll show a little of that. So that's the first coat. I'll put a second one on, same process. The reason for 2 coats is primarily so I make sure I didn't miss any spots. I let the friction polish cure overnight, and I'm going to put on 2 coats of carnauba wax. So vase 1 is complete. And here's the rings sitting here waiting for vase 2. As I stated earlier, you get 2 rings out of every one, so you get 2 vases. So